More than 15 years ago, I found nursing during a very difficult time in my own life, and I think I was really looking for a silver lining or a glimmer of hope. Now, for me, I was 20 years old, and my mom, my best friend, was diagnosed with advanced cancer. And that was the start of a 5-year journey from my family, marked by misdiagnoses, failed treatments, and then ultimately the loss of someone that we loved very much. And this all came despite the best efforts of her care team with the best tools that they had available at that time. What I remember most about this experience was this distinct, constant feeling of uncertainty, just truly not knowing what would happen next. And I think that was the hardest part for us. What I also remember and what truly changed my life was the nurses. Now, these were individuals I was perhaps sitting down with for the first time that would hold my hand, help us through difficult news, and formulate a plan to move forward. I truly started to see these nurses as my heroes, and I wanted to be just like them when I grew up, right? So soon after, I entered nursing school. Now, during nursing school, I fell in love with the care of moms and babies. And this is something I hear from students often, but something about that care during new life is truly magical, being a part of that. I think for me, subconsciously, I was probably also moving a little bit away from that end of life that had become so real for my family for so long. But unfortunately, it did not take long for me to understand that uncertainty and even some devastating situations are also present at the beginning of life as well. So in particular, in what has really become the focus of my program of research, I began to note and witness these preterm births. So this is the early birth of a baby simply before they are ready to enter this world. This is common in the United States. It's about 1 in 10 births, and also worldwide. So when we think about the fact that there are 141 million births across the world, this number adds up quickly. Now, oftentimes, we do not know or understand what precedes or causes that preterm birth. So it's very difficult to prevent something that you can't predict or understand. Now, when I think of pregnancy, I really think of this journey, this experience, and we don't often talk about death in this context, right? So we know across the world there are about 56 million deaths every year. 5.4 million of those deaths are to children under the age of 5. This number falls after age ranges only of 75 to 79 and 80 to 84. So when you think about that high peak followed by a gap and another high peak, there is something really wrong about these early deaths, right? It does not fall into that concept of life expectancy, and it's something that I've always really aimed to address. So we know that most of these deaths are occurring in the first month of life, and the number one cause is preterm birth. And this is something that we can't ignore, that we have to keep pursuing a solution to. So I can think back to my first job in phone triage in an OBGYN clinic, and women calling in with perhaps experiencing some cramping or contractions during pregnancy. Now, oftentimes that will go away. We can do a couple of things and it will be relieved, but sometimes it will progress. Sometimes it will go away and return. And it's very hard to identify who those true risk cases are versus just normal variations in pregnancy. So there is so much uncertainty in that process, and so much relying on what you're experiencing to know how to watch and address it. What we also know is that once we hit that point of true labor, it is very difficult to stop. So what we're aiming for is prevention, but we simply don't have those tools yet. So if you think about your journey of pregnancy and you're sitting there at the beginning looking ahead, it is truly beautiful, right? You look out, you envision the future. It's fairly predictable. We know about how long that journey should be, and you can start to vision very realistically what you might encounter in your future. So for me and my family, that might be the preference of cuddles to sleep during long nights. That might be enjoying a family meal where you're wearing more of it than you're eating because the baby is having so much fun playing. Those are very real feelings and emotions for families as they're building their group together. And this is something that can be very devastating if you don't get to realize that. So we also recognize that there can be these challenges or rapids, right, to a pregnancy. We know that women will encounter something, right? Be it an infection, a stressor in her life. But what we have a harder time understanding is how the body will respond to that in a way that can versus cannot maintain the pregnancy. So right now it's very difficult for us to be able to prescribe or think about the best path for women to overcome those challenges. And that's really something that my laboratory is trying to address. So in 2017, I launched the Maternal Immune Monitoring Laboratory and work with a tremendous group of individuals every day, trying to reach our goals within what we're aiming to do. And we look at a very specific challenge during pregnancy, and that's an immune challenge. So we know that these immune cells will typically fight germs in our body, right? So bacteria, viruses, even different proteins that we release when there's damage or something like that. But we also know that immune cells seem to be repurposed during pregnancy in very interesting and specific ways. Now, at the time of labor, including term labor, you see these immune cells rush to the maternal-fetal interface, and they'll help mom through that process. In fact, it's very hard to stop that from happening once it is. What we don't quite understand is that these immune cells are perhaps driving labor early on, and a lot of signs indicate that they may be. So we'll see oftentimes infection or even inflammation in the absence of infection in cases of preterm birth. And what we're trying to do is move beyond this measurement of infectious exposures or inflammatory markers passively in mom's blood, because those don't seem to predict or prevent preterm birth. We're looking at this critical piece of the maternal immune response to challenges that they may encounter. So what I'm really envisioning is this simple blood test that we could give to every mom across the world to help us for the first time confidently understand and communicate immune-associated risk for that pregnancy. Once we have those predictive models, we can begin to prevent instead of treat later on, that point of no return, what we think might be happening. So what we really aim for is looking for those earliest biological deviations before a single challenge has been encountered. We try to predict that for you so that we can then provide these testing guidelines to help us move through that. Now, I want to move beyond that initial recognition early on in nursing school of lives lost to lives saved, right? This is really our goal, why we come into work every day. One life, better yet, many lives. But what we're aiming to do is provide this glimpse into future events so that we can change the way that pregnancy or really many disease processes could be experienced, removing important layers of uncertainty so that we confidently understand what's happening and how we can proceed for that individual. I'm already looking forward to that moment in time where a nurse may hold your hand or your family member's hand and can tell you that everything will be okay because we know what's wrong and we know how to fix it. That would be a tremendous feeling for everybody. Now that's the future of health that I envision for moms and babies. I hope that you'll join me in pursuing that vision, but also bringing this to every aspect of healthcare and immune-related health and otherwise.